right, let's kick things off. Welcome to another webinar with Mariner Wealth Advisors. Today's session is on providing financial security for your loved ones with special needs. We want to make sure that this session is engaging for you. We'd like to hear from you, so please make sure to use the Q&A function at the bottom of the page. So, speaking of the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, we are going to try to get to all of your questions. We usually do get a number of really good questions from the audience. If for some reason we can't get to your question today, please reach out to someone at Mariner Wealth Advisors and we'll make sure to get you connected to somebody who can help you with that question. Also note that closed captioning has been enabled for this webinar. If you'd like to use it, click on that CC icon at the bottom of your screen. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Christina Lynn. I'm a member of the practice management team here at Mariner, and I will be your hostess for the webinar. We have two excellent speakers in store for you today. We have Cory Allen, a senior wealth advisor, and Kevne Sharpe, a wealth advisor. They are both certified financial planners, which is the gold standard of financial planning designations in the wealth management field. They are also both chartered special needs consultants. So I'd like to turn the microphone over to our presenters to briefly introduce themselves and also tell us why they decided to specialize in special needs planning. So Cory, I'll start with you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Christina. I'm very excited to be here today. As you mentioned, I'm Cory Allen with the Manasquan, New Jersey office, Senior Wealth Advisor, CFP and ChSNC. I've been in the industry going on 20 years. And for now about half of those years, working with families with children or adult children with special needs. So very excited to be here today. The reason I started in this is that I realized early on in my career that I was really not equipped to really give advice to people who had these very specialized family situations. And so I took it upon myself several years ago initially just to get more educated. Naturally, when I find that I do not understand something or I am worried about knowing something, I go out and find the information, and then realized very shortly after this, the whole industry is a very underserved clientele. And so that's where it just got, and I realized that there was some good that we could do and really help people. So that's my why. I really wanted to get out there and help.
Yeah, and hello everyone. I'm Kevne Sharpe. I am in the Highlands Ranch, Colorado area, which is right near Denver. So go Nuggets, just had to give that shout out. I have been in the industry for a few decades, literally over 3. So let's not do the math. And I have been very, very diligently, proactively trying to help families where there's a member with a disability. And that's primarily driven by the fact that I have an adult daughter with a disability. So I've walked the walk for a long time. And what is so interesting, maybe even about that, is that while I have been a CFP for indeed 30 years, and raising a daughter in this community and with similar issues that other people are facing, I didn't know how much I didn't know until I went through the curriculum that Cory and I both went through to achieve that designation of Chartered Special Needs Consultant. And I came out of all that study and testing and so forth thinking, oh my goodness, I need to correct a lot of things for my family. But now I really, like Cory, want to be helping any way that I can this very large community that is terribly underserved in an area of planning that is complex and indeed high stakes.
Thank you both for sharing your stories. I always love hearing how you ended up with a special focus in your wealth management practice. So, Cory, I'm going to start with the first question with you. Why is special needs financial planning such an important topic?
It's a great question. And what I originally realized is just how many people it impacts. I mean, just looking at the statistics, there's 26% of the United States, adults in the United States, are living with a disability. And so extrapolate that into the millions of people who, are living with disabilities and children with disabilities. It's a large segment of the population and a very minuscule segment of the population of advisors who are really focusing on that. And I think it's just from an importance standpoint, a lot of people who are caring for a loved one or, are actively involved in the community where they're trying to, make ends meet and keep their head above water and just do everything they can for their family. The lack of time or access to information or guidance means that a lot of people don't really have a process. They don't have a plan. So, I mean, the reason this is so important is there's a lot of people out there who are walking around without a plan. And as planners, it's right there in the title. We need to make sure that our clients are getting that information and that as many people as possible are being informed about, what they can do, what their options are, what's out there. And as Kevne mentioned before, it's too high stakes for the people impacted to just wing it. Because if you're winging it, then anything can happen, and we want to control as much of the outcome as possible for people, especially with all the unknowns and uncertainty that come around having a loved one with a disability.
Gotcha, Cory. Planning is so important. Okay, Kevne, this one's for you. What is the first step in planning for someone with a disability?
Well, the first step when we're trying to plan for the security of somebody is to get the lay of the land of who they are, and importantly, memorialize what we know about them so that in the horrible situation where somebody has to suddenly step into the shoes of a parent who's been caring for a loved one with a disability actually knows what to do. So we call this document, in fact, a letter of intent. You can also go by a memorandum of intent or a letter of instruction. And while there are no rules per se to what to include, think of it again as to when it most likely would be used, which is when all of a sudden the parent is out of the picture or the caregiver. And now somebody's coming in what could be a time of grief and uncertainty and fear to try to then resume where that parent left off. Excuse me. So you think about, well, what to include? Well, we want to know something about the child. What's the diagnosis? What's the prognosis? Who are the medical providers? Who are the service providers? All of the contact information for everybody. Are they on medications? What's the prescription? Where do we even get the prescription? So we're looking at the day-to-day needs. We're looking at and I'll just use the framework of, as a parent of a child, what can the child do for themselves regarding what we call activities of daily living? Do they need assistance dressing? Are buttons okay, or do we need to stick with zippers and pullovers? What are the child's social activities? Are they in a day program? Do they go to school? Where is that IEP document? Very important in a school setting. Where is it? What is it? So we're looking at everything that we can think of that makes up our child. We also then want to start to quantify what anything that we're doing for our child might cost. Again, we're talking about planning. So as you're going through the letter of intent and building it and completing it with as much information as possible, I really consider it a gift of love to the recipient and the child, because what could be better received than this download of information about who this child is and how to care for them. But during that process, then we can start to kind of quantify what is it that we are doing so that we can provide the financial security needed, say if we're out of the picture. So that's a letter of intent. But we also want to create a vision. So we're in a letter of intent, we're documenting about this is life today. But what about the vision? What do we see for our child? Importantly, what do they see for themselves? And what can we do to help them in their path to further their ability to be as independent and happy and successful and productive in our society as possible. With this vision, we're also going through the process of trying to quantify, are there some things in there that we think we're going to have to be financially responsible for? Where are they going to live? With whom are they going to live? Who's going to care for them? Is it going to be a family member or maybe an agency? Is that going to have a price tag? Because with this vision, we can lay the foundation of how to then move forward with a plan. It's a lot easier to get somewhere if we know what it is we're trying to accomplish. So creating that vision is very, very helpful. And the more detailed we can think about and provide, the better. Knowing life happens. Things have to change. We have to have flexibility in what we design as our plan, but at least we can know, we know what we want to accomplish. Now let's figure out how we're going to get there.
I just learned a lot. That letter of intent is something new to me. So thank you for teaching me about that. And I like how you framed like what comes out of that is the vision that you create for your loved one. So speaking of visions, Cory, this question is for you. How does someone start the process of funding the vision? And what steps do you, as planners, believe are necessary to follow?
Yeah, funding the vision is, it's great to have the vision, but you got to have the money to make sure it all happens too. And that's very, it's great to have ideas, but we have to get practical at some point and really, buckle down and figure out how is this vision going to be funded? And at the most basic level, in not always, but oftentimes, a lot of the funds are going to come from the parents or other loved ones and family members to fund the vision. Many people with disabilities are funding their own retirement, they're funding their own investment accounts, and they're growing their own wealth. But by and large, a lot of the money will come from the family or trust and things of that nature. So we really have to come up with a plan. Now, oftentimes, and just in many of my conversations with clients and people in the disability world, you find that there's a very, very many selfless individuals who literally don't care for themselves the way they should because they are constantly caring for other people. And what you oftentimes have to do is sit down and say, look, we need to take care of you first, believe it or not, to make this vision work. And what I mean by that, think about when you're on a plane and the stewardess comes on and says, hey, the flight attendant, it's time to go through all the pre-flight check here. And oh, by the way, if those masks drop down and you're in the middle of a heart attack when it happens, make sure you put your mask on first before you assist others. And that's really what we're trying to do here. We want to make sure that your plan, your financial plan, you, the parent, you, the grandparent, you, the advocate, your plan needs to work first, or it's highly likely that the plan won't work for your loved one. So, that means taking a look at your resources, your income, your assets, your liabilities, your expenses, everything, and really coming up with a financial plan for you. Because ultimately, we need to know what you're going to have available to, fund this vision, whether it's during your lifetime or after your lifetime. And that is only done through planning. If you, again, wing it, you're kind of playing with fire as far as, how much you're going to have left over to fund the various financial, visions that you have for your children. So, or anyone else. So, ultimately it's about creating a financial plan or a cash flow plan and making sure that you have that written down. And if you're listening to this, whether you have a child or an adult child with disabilities or not, and you don't have a financial plan, that's where we always start as financial advisors. It's not with the hottest investment out there. It's thinking, what does your plan look like? Are you all set for retirement? Are you all set for everything else that's going to come your way in the future. So those are the things that we're really thinking about first. And then we can take that information and start to build a second financial plan. And that could be for the person with disability, either in tandem with them sitting at the table, or with if it's just, financial, being in that conversation is not appropriate, having that conversation with the trustee or the parents or whomever, and building that plan. But you're dovetailing one plan from the other. You've got the parents' financial plan in this case, just to use a generic example, and we're flowing that through at different intervals to see how much assets are going to be available during their lifetime, after their lifetime, for their loved one, and what's that going to look like in the long run as far as resources that are available.
Yeah, that's the core financial planning principle right there. Put your own oxygen mask on first. Very helpful. Thank you, Cory. I'm going to pause and ask a question that came from the audience, which I think is a kind of nice little break here. It came from Chris. So they're asking, do you two assist other advisors or families across Mariner on special needs cases, or tell us about how Mariner addresses this issue?
Sure. Yes, constantly. That's one of the things that I love doing the most is spreading the gospel. So, when I can help clients of Mariner, clients not of Mariner, it's ultimately we're looking to, I look at our firm as one big team. So if somebody in Detroit, Michigan gives me a call and needs assistance, I'm right there to help out. And I still encourage everyone out there to do all the heavy lifting in terms of education. Today's webinar is just a starting point, but get educated, but there are resources available for you if you need them.
Great. Thanks, Cory. Kevne, do you have anything to add?
No, the same. I just had somebody from Texas reach out to me asking a question about a situation, and it was with great pleasure that I got to share. You might want to consider this, that, and so forth. So yeah, I think Cory and I are both on the same page, that we are just eager to, like he said, share the gospel, get the word out on how to navigate all this.
Well, that is much appreciated, because there aren't a whole lot of chartered special needs consultants running around. So thank you for your service there. Cory, I'm going to ask a follow-up question about funding the vision. It came in from Carol. So is it common to fund a plan upon the death of a caregiver? You can also save this for later if you might cover it at a different point.
Oh, this is a great, we'll come back to this for sure, but just to answer the question now, it is common. It's very common that a vision is quote unquote funded at the death of a parent or a grandparent. It's not uncommon to see it funded sooner than that for various reasons, but by and large, the resources that are available right now need to be used during the lifetime of the individual who saved him, the family that saved him for retirement. Person with a child with a disability still has a 401k, still goes to work and retires at 65 and lives their life in retirement and wants to travel and do all the other things that people love to do during retirement. Money needs to be there for that. So perhaps the idea oftentimes is I'm going to utilize what I need to utilize during my lifetime, but then I'll make sure there's something available when I'm finished, or my plan allows for something to be available when I don't need the money anymore. And it does involve living on a budget. If you bounce your last check, there's nothing left. So to fund the vision, there needs to be something available at some point.
Very helpful. Thank you, Cory. Okay, so I'm going to back up quick and talk to Kevne about the letter of intent. So in order to create this vision, we start with the letter of intent. Do you have any tips or tools that you could provide for developing that letter of intent?
Well, so yes, because just hearing what I said about it, it sounds, I think, overwhelming and daunting, and how in the world? But what I suggest is that people consider the scenario. What if my child was going to be staying with some friends or so forth for the weekend? What would I want them and need them to know? Start there and then expand. And I will share with you, while I was like everybody else going, oh my goodness, this is just daunting. Once I started, and my version personally is just a free form letter, but I can share with you, if you go online and Google letter of intent, you'll find some different templates and so forth. Mine's just free form. And I'll share with you, once I got started talking about my kid, who doesn't like talking about their kid? So I just went into everything, including chocolate milk on a Sunday morning is the cat's meow. So that level of detail, because again, I'm thinking, what would I want someone to know if suddenly they're in my shoes? What could help in that situation? So it takes a bit of time. You want it in a format that you can amend as events unfold. You also want it in a format that is available to others and let others know where it is. And one thing I'll say that is also something to consider, while this is not a legal document, one could keep it next to an estate plan and have people that might be involved in settling an estate or managing know where that is. But a trustee of a special needs trust that we'll be talking about in just a minute can also refer to this letter of intent, as they're charged with making distributions according to the terms of the trust and to meet all the guidelines they need to follow. But if there is a decision that has to be made on an expense, they can refer to that letter of intent, say, but this is what mom and dad wanted. This was part of this vision. So it gives guidance to not just a new caregiver.
Kevne, I love that idea of having almost like a practice round, a trial run of going away for a weekend or going away on vacation for a week, creating that document and seeing, giving that a try, of course, but also it bleeds into, this is going to tell us if, in many ways, if the people who are involved are the right people to be involved in the future, because if everything goes well, it's probably a good fit. If things don't go well, despite what's in the letter of intent, you might have to go back to the drawing board as far as, who would I want to name as a guardian in the future, or a trustee. You do want them to get along and to agree and to have a good rapport. So yeah, that's a great way to get it started.
That's a great point.
That is a good idea. So Kevne, when you were talking about creating the letter of intent, it actually reminded me of a letter that I wrote as part of my estate plan. So I was a single mom for many years with minor kids. And I wrote a letter to the kids and to the guard, like whoever would be their guardian, who I would name, listing all these things that you're talking about. And so it seems really similar. And I share this story because I was a crying, sobbing mess. I had snot running down my nose. It's like an emotional activity to actually write this letter of intent, I would imagine, but it's so worth it. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Positively. Yeah, well, I wasn't necessarily maybe crying like you, but it's still, like I said, who doesn't like to talk about their kid? I did just start gushing about things that maybe are irrelevant, but it felt really good to express, and maybe some little nugget is going to be useful at some time.
Yeah, agree.
I think the relief of having it done too, once you do it, you get through that, rip the Band-Aid off, it's great. Because then you don't have to go back and redo it at any point. It's there, and it just requires some maintenance once a year, or as major events occur.
Yeah, that peace of mind that you get as their guardian, to know that you have all of your ducks in a row, is priceless. All right, great conversation. I'm going to move on to the next question, which is also for Cory. So you mentioned insurance briefly. Can you expand on the role that insurance plays in multi-generational cash flow planning?
Absolutely. So insurance is, we talk about it as advisors, talk about insurance with our clients on a daily basis, and it's out there for a variety of reasons. But really what I'm always thinking about with insurance with, folks who have children or adult children with disabilities is ultimately, what happens if something happens to you? If something, along the way happens to you, any various number of problems occur, what do you have in place to make sure that the vision is continuously funded? And insurance is typically a good way to do that. And I really look at three big ones outside of the ones that we all have to have anyway. Disability insurance. Let's use like an example here. If you had somebody, say you're, in your early 50s, you have a child with a disability, you're working, you're earning a good income, and you want to retire 10 years down the road, perhaps travel the world and do everything you want to do. Well, at this time, at this very point in your life, you still have a long runway before you're going to be retired. And so if something happens to you and you too also ended up with a disability, well, you would want disability insurance to cover that paycheck that you're no longer receiving. And many employers have disability insurance. And if you ask our insurance team, they'll tell you oftentimes those plans are woefully short on what is needed for that monthly paycheck coming in. So, a lot of our clients who have children with disabilities do have a disability policy on top of what they're getting through work to, solve for that problem, to close a gap in their plan. At the same time, this person in their 50s might be looking at, way down the road. Perhaps they're caring for a parent who's starting to, show their age and is having their own health problems and perhaps needs assisted living or additional care that they didn't need previously. And that age, that, mid 50s, 60s, that's the time to have or potentially look into some sort of long-term care policy, a long-term care insurance policy. If you don't have that and you're caring for a loved one with disabilities, say when you're 80 years old, then it's possible that you will need that care and that your resources that you had earmarked for, your loved one are going to end up going toward those long-term care costs. So having that risk mitigated or at least managed through a long-term care policy is oftentimes a very, very good idea. But you got to strike while the iron's hot. You can't get these types of policies in your 80s. You generally have to get a reasonable price or any sort of reasonable policy. You need to start thinking about this when you're in your 50s and probably the latest in your 60s. And then, of course, everyone's favorite topic, life insurance. God forbid something happens to you. Again, you're in your 50s and you die. There's that dream of those assets. Essentially, if you don't have life insurance, whatever you've saved to that point is what's available. And do we know, with good planning, hopefully you're able to self-insure, but most of the time that's not the case. I mean by that is self-insuring for your loved one, that they're going to have enough resources to cover their financial plan in the future. You still have all those years of earning that are now taken away. You still have, all those years of growth where your assets were going to actually, be for you and not necessarily for your loved one. Now they're getting transferred over perhaps into a trust for your loved one, or for a spouse who may have a different earning capacity, So ultimately, we want to think about the lifetime as well. There's different kinds of life insurance, and we see more of the permanent kind of life insurance, whether it's whole life or universal life, or what we call second to die universal life, where you have a policy that for a married couple that pays out after the second spouse has passed away. You want to create this pool of assets that is there no matter how long you live, and life insurance can do that. Initially, it might be covering for the need that you have to cover your salary if you're still working. But as you age and you're retired, it's actually there to create a pool of assets. So you don't have to tap into your retirement money that you've saved, and you've got something there that can be paid out or put into a trust for your loved one down the road. And it's not going to expire like with a term life insurance policy.
Yeah, I'd say that insurance is not the most glamorous of financial planning topics, but it is really important to allow your advisor to do an insurance analysis and be open-minded to where there's gaps there. So great points.
We've never had a client call us up after someone had passed away or a long-term care need was out there and say, wow, I'm really disappointed I got this insurance policy.
Yeah, it's kind of the long-term plan there that pays off. Okay, so we have a slew of questions about trust, and I've been kind of pushing those off to when we talk about trust, but there's two kind of tangential questions I want to ask now because I think they're relevant. So Carol asks about naming a guardian, having the same person as a guardian as the trustee. Do you just want to talk about that quickly?
Or you want to weigh in, or
I'll jump in just real quick. Typically our preference for trustees on special needs trusts is to have corporate trustees. So generally that would mean there's a separation between the guardian and the trust. Inevitably, we do see where there are individuals who are serving as both guardian and trustee of the trust. And they may be very, highly intelligent, very good at what they're doing, but it is a lot to put on one person. There's just a lot of work that even for parents who are already expected to serve in some of those roles, it is a lot of work to be both a trustee and a guardian. So if you can, it is good to separate those roles as much as possible. And I would also argue that most people are not great at both. A lot of times as guardian, it's good to have some of the more soft skills and be able to, know the person at a very deep level and know how to work with them. And that may not be the person who's the best trustee, who's with the best financial acumen. So you really, and vice versa, it can work both ways. So that's my 2 cents on it, just from experience and speaking with special needs attorneys and other folks out there who are very deeply involved.
Yeah, and I'll just add a little bit there too. I mean, I am in full agreement with considering a professional in the role of a trustee. What I've also experienced, besides what Cory was just sharing, there's a lot to it. There's tax reporting and so forth. And some people are just not, the best at those sorts of tasks. But there's also the potential for, a problem with a relationship. If the person who's responsible for making distributions is the person that's providing the care, and if a distribution is being asked for from the beneficiary, and that trustee has to say no, maybe they just can't because of the terms of the trust, but that's also the guardian. And now there can be some strife with, why can't you give me what I want? And I have seen some families break apart when a sibling was a trustee for another. So having the trustee as this objective professional managing the funds and so forth, I think can have really a great help to any kind of emotional strife that could develop too.
Totally agree. I think that's true in just the estate planning general side as well. Okay, Kevne, I have another question for you. What are some additional resources that families will want to be aware of to support their loved one?
Yes, and thankfully there are some potential resources beyond mom and dad's pockets, beyond grandma and so forth. And these are actually public benefits. So there are some that are means tested, meaning that for a person to receive these benefits, they have to have low means. And I'll share with you what I think is just really a sad commentary. To qualify for a benefit from Social Security called SSI, which is an abbreviation for Supplemental Security Income, as well as Medicaid, people can only have $2,000 to their name. That's between a little checking account, a little savings account. And what I just am so disappointed in our system is that $2,000 sum has been the same for over 40 years. And I find that quite remarkable. I mean, everything else gets inflated. That number has not. So if somebody has just $2,000 or less in their name, and they have a disability, and there's different criteria that Social Security needs to review and indeed consider a disability, then they might be able to qualify for, I'll start with the Social Security one, that SSI. They also can't have a lot of wages. So let's say somebody has a part-time job, but if they're earning more than what's called substantial gainful activity, which is a number, it's adjusted every year, that one is, and it's $1,470 a month. If somebody has a disability, but they're earning more than that, then SSI says, yeah, you know what, you really don't have a disability, even if they have a certain diagnosis. So if somebody meets that certain criteria, they're going to get to this SSI $914 a month. And that's supposed to provide food and shelter. And while that's more than nothing, I'm not so sure where in this country that could fully provide food and shelter, but it certainly is a help to families. Now, people don't really even apply until the child is 18 because now they're an adult. Prior to that, all of the family's resources for that $2,000 limitation are considered. It makes it really hard to qualify. So at 18, the child applies for SSI. And for anyone who's listening that is thinking about doing so, 85% of initial SSI applications are denied. It's just a fact. And it's a sad fact, but it's a fact. Now, it does not mean you walk away and go, oh my goodness, we're never going to have this opportunity. No, it means you just dig deeper and figure out why was it denied and what do we have to do to provide more data for our appeal. So fight the fight, it's worth it. When you qualify for SSI, you also automatically qualify for Medicaid. Now, Medicaid, and for some people, it has a stigma, which I really wish it wouldn't. I think it's like a golden safety net. Medicaid covers medical expenses. It's the payer of last resort. So even if the child is on the parent's insurance plan through work, and they can be until they're 26, but even copays and deductibles through that insurance plan are then filled in by Medicaid. So it's really great. And then when they don't have access to mom and dad's insurance, Medicaid, you have to work a little bit about finding providers that take Medicaid, but it really does a great job in covering for medical expenditures. But something else with Medicaid, which might be, I won't say more valuable, but as valuable maybe, Medicaid provides funds to provide services to people who have disabilities to help them live independently in the community, or that's the objective. And these are called Medicaid waivers. There might be a different name based on your state, but it's all available there. And these Medicaid waivers can provide things like somebody coming in to help the person with a disability with homemaker skills, some, housekeeping, some mentorship, learning budgeting, so many things that people could learn and benefit from to help them in their path to independence. So we have the SSI benefit, we have the Medicaid benefit, but we also have another one which I find that many families are not familiar with, and that is a benefit that is tied to the Social Security that parents have been contributing to their whole life, and now they are going to retire. So when a parent retires, and if the child has a disability, doesn't have a lot of income, they can qualify for an SSDI benefit, Social Security Disability Income, but a little bit different version, and it's called a CDB, or Childhood Disability Benefit, also known as, as a disabled adult child benefit. A lot of pollen here in Denver. So this equals to 50% of that parent's Social Security retirement benefit. Now, when the parent passes, that benefit increases to 75% of that retiree benefit. And what is wonderful and so important in our planning as we're projecting out this multi-generational cash flow need, we're talking now about a child who might be 50 years old and has another 30 years of life that we need to plan for. This benefit, equal to 75% of that mom or dad's retirement benefit, lasts for their life. So that is a benefit that, again, many people aren't aware of. When when you are applying for a Social Security retirement benefit, there is a box that says, do you have a child with a disability? And if you check yes, that starts the ball rolling for that consideration. And that's a wonderful benefit. You don't get both the SSI and SSDI in full because one offsets the other, but you get at a minimum 50% of mom and dads when they retire, one of them, and 75% when they pass.
And you're also eligible for Medicare after 2 years of waiting. So once you've been receiving your Social Security disability income check for 2 years, you could actually have your health insurance through Medicare, even if you're 35 years old.
Yes, yes. And in fact, one can qualify for both Medicare and Medicaid. Medicaid still is the payer of last resort, but you're just building these layers of safety net for your child, knowing what's available and knowing how to navigate to qualify. And all of that is something that's vitally important, of course, to include in the financial plan. So we can clearly know what gap exists. Is there a gap?
I would just add there's many programs in many states that require you to your loved one with a disability to constantly stay eligible for Medicaid in particular. All those add-on programs that you were just talking about, Kevne, those oftentimes require Medicaid eligibility. So even if you do go on SSDI and Medicare, you might still only be able to have $2,000 in the checking account. So you just have to make sure that before you start receiving any benefits or you start any programs, that you understand where the funding has come from and what can happen to foul that up. So that's important as well. These things sound great, but you always have to kind of tread into it a little bit lightly to make sure that it's not going to negatively impact you either.
Gotcha. So on the SSDI, is there an age minimum or maximum that we should be aware of?
Age 22. So the disability must have occurred before the age of 22 years old. So if the disability occurs when you're 45, it's assumed that you'll have a work history and you'll collect disability on your own record. But if you're a child and your disability, let's say, happened, you've had it your whole life, then you would qualify as soon as a parent either collects disability themselves, passes away, or most commonly collects their retirement benefit.
Okay. Now, Cory, I did space out as I was reading some of the questions, so I'm sorry if you just answered this, but is there a income or investment limit on the SSDI benefit?
Income, you have to keep the income at below that 1470 that Kevne was mentioning. So if you're working, I have a client whose daughter is currently working. This person is earning a living. They're just below the 1470, but on an SSDI. So they're collecting their let's say $1,300 a month from their employment, plus they're getting their disability check as well for the total amount. But this person could have unlimited amount of assets because they're only on SSDI and they don't have to be, they're not trying to be eligible for anything that requires Medicaid eligibility.
Gotcha. Okay, time is flying here and we haven't even talked about trust. We have so many questions about trust. So my next question is for both of you. Cory, you'll go first and then we'll follow up with the trust question from Kevne. But the question is, are there additional tools or strategies families should be aware of or of specific to supporting a loved one with a disability?
Absolutely. And just in the interest of time, I do want to make sure that we have tons of time to talk about the Special Needs Trust. So I'm going to throw out a website right now for what I'm about to talk about, which is ABLE accounts or 529A accounts. But the resource is ablenrc.org. That's ABLENRC.org. ChSNC.org. That is the nonprofit that is dedicated to ABLE accounts. In a nutshell, several years ago in 2014, an act was passed. I'm just going to call it the ABLE Act. And this was a creation of an account type that allows individuals with disabilities to save more money in their name than that $2,000 that Kevne was talking about before. An ABLE account is an account that, like a traditional 529 account, when once funded, grows tax-free, and then it will pay out tax-free if it's used correctly, with for qualified disability expenses. Qualified disability expenses are pretty broad. It runs the gamut of food, housing, primarily assistive technology, healthcare, education, all the things that really anything that's kind of essential ultimately falls under that. I would always say go and before you use one of these plans and start distributing money, read through the rules before you do that. But you can put up to the one gifting limit amount exclusion this year, which is $17,000 a year. One beneficiary or one owner can have one account total, and those accounts can be managed by the person, or it can be managed by a parent, a loved one, by someone else. There are a few caveats for these plans, and that is that if you're on SSI, you do not want to see your balance hit $100,000 or go higher than that. Otherwise, your SSI check will stop. And if you live in a state that has Medicaid clawback, meaning if something happens and the beneficiary passes away, if there's money in the plan and they also were on Medicaid before they passed away, the state is the first beneficiary on the plan as far as getting money out of the plan. So we call that a Medicaid clawback. So these plans are great to set aside money, especially when you're distributing money out regularly, or if money comes in unexpectedly to a checking account and, oh my goodness, I'm going to have too much in my account, you can sweep it over into the 529, the ABLE account, and go there. So this is a cheap, very inexpensive alternative to a special needs trust that was rolled out and an option for people out there.
We didn't receive any questions on that, so hopefully that was a good something that our audience learned. Okay, so Kevne, can you talk to us about special needs trusts?
Yes, I sure can. So we just learned that with ABLE accounts, you can only put 17,000 in. If there's some wages involved, and a little more can go in. But by and large, we can't think of this as a wealth transfer vehicle. It is wonderful for day to day. Let's not go over the 2,000 and that sort of situation. Maybe for smaller gifts, birthday gifts, and so forth. It's a great vehicle, and I suggest everybody have one. Now, what about for situations where we really do want more available for our child, not just for the immediate needs, but also for their 30, 40, 50 years of additional life, even those years long after we are gone? What can we do to keep those out of the eyes of Social Security as well as Medicaid? So that's where special needs trusts come in. We are not attorneys. We always highly suggest you work with not only an attorney, but also an attorney that is well-skilled and educated and knowledgeable in special needs planning. And just like with financial planners, there's just a little small subset of us who are knowledgeable in this space. It is the same with estate planners. So as you're thinking about having a conversation with one, make sure you know if they know about this sort of work, because again, it's easy to make mistakes, even in legal documents. And what you don't want is to have a trust with money in it, and then have Social Security and Medicaid, which have to review them after there's money in them, say, yeah, no, this is no good, and have to go back to the drawing board. Even more problematic if the trust was funded at somebody's death. Okay, so that's the disclosure and disclaimer, work with a qualified attorney. But there are a variety of different trusts, and the decision on what type of special needs trust, it's also known as a supplemental needs trust. But the decision on which type is driven by where's the money coming from. If it is the beneficiary, so that's the child or person with a disability, I'll use the term beneficiary, if it's their money, maybe it's from a settlement, maybe it's from loving grandma who wanted to help out and in her will said, I want this much to go to this person. And then, as we all know now, that wreaks havoc with some of the public benefit opportunities that we have. So if money ends up in their lap and they're going, how do I fix this problem? We use a first party trust, the first party being them. They're the first party. This has the same wonderful benefits as the other couple that I'll mention, because it's not then viewed once that's created and funded, it's not considered a resource in the eyes of Social Security and Medicaid. And maybe SSI is off the table where you had to have just, no more than 2,000 in your name. Maybe somebody is receiving SSDI. So you go, well, there's no resource problem there. But as Cory mentioned, that Medicaid is what we really want to preserve. And so with that, we still are limited to that very small resource amount. So a first party trust will get it out of that child's name. They receive all the benefits that any other trust provide. There is a trustee who's making distributions. Again, we suggest it be a professional trustee. And there's some other components that I'll share in just a second. But the only negative to that first party trust is oftentimes they're created because something happened and it's got to be a quick response. Quick, I need a first party trust because we don't want money sitting in the child's name for more than, say, a month. But a real big negative is the fact that they all have that Medicaid clawback. If there's anything left in that first party trust and the child has now passed, Medicaid's going to come in and take what they say, this has been your tab, and we're not going to be able to pull from this trust to be made whole. So by and large, you just think anything that had to go to a first party trust is staying with the beneficiary and then Medicaid. Now, there's a third party trust. Third party meaning money's coming from anyone else, not the beneficiary. So that's grandma, grandpa, parents, loving uncle. It can be anybody. And that then is in a trust where it is protected. So it's not viewed as a resource for Medicaid purposes. There is a trustee involved, just like the first party trust. And the big differentiator is the fact that there's no Medicaid clawback. So families will often say, this is for our child with a disability. However, if they don't need it all, then we want the balance to go to a charity, siblings, but there is more freedom with what the grantor, the mom or dad, is typically the one that creates it. They don't have to. Grandma and grandpa could create it. But there is some control over where that residual from the trust can go if it's not needed for the child. There's another type of trust as well called a pooled trust. And this is well suited for when there is more that you want to shelter than what an able can accommodate, but it's not a larger sum. And so we have to know that first party trust and third party trust, they are drafted by attorneys. There is an outlay. They're not necessarily cheap. And attorneys charge different levels. Are they worth every penny? Absolutely, because we have to think of why we're doing it. But the pooled trust is good where you're aggregating your sum for your child with others. And then it's usually a lower cost, and you're working with an organization that knows how to manage trust and makes proper distributions. But again, it's not designed for being able to pass on any remaining balance to anybody else. And I know, Cory, we were talking about this earlier. You had some special comments about the pooled trust as well.
So the pooled trust is interesting because it allows, let's say you do have enough assets to comfortably fund a traditional third-party trust and ordinarily wouldn't need a pool trust. I've still seen a lot of people use them because the pool trust often is administered by a nonprofit organization that is 100% dedicated to advocacy, guardianship, and other, healthcare welfare of children. And so, and adult children. So, if you put some money in that pool trust, maybe the minimum, which could be 25,000 up to 100,000, I've seen, that will allow you to get all the services that they offer without just taking your whole financial plan and kind of ripping it up and doing something different. So I just think it's it could be a great combination or a great complement to what you're already doing.
Yes, I agree with that. And then just in real quick, maybe some summary of the special needs trust. The families, part of their plan, can determine when the trust is going to be formed. Many families will say, you know, there's no one that's got money for my child except for us when we pass, and maybe it's with our life insurance proceeds or our, retirement savings. So therefore, we're going to have what's called a testamentary trust. It's part of our will. It only goes into effect once we pass. The other way one family can do this is if there's a possibility where there's going to be some gifting, some inheritance from relatives and so forth, a third-party trust can be established during life. It's an inter vivos trust. So you create this vessel. It can be empty until maybe grandma or grandpa, part of their estate plan, says they want to fund the trust. It didn't go into the child's name, but it's there for the ability to provide that quality of life for the child that they would like, and of course the parents would like too.
This is great information. Thank you guys so much. So Cory, I'm going to send my last question to you, and hopefully you can answer it in about 2 minutes just so we can be respectful of everybody's time. But the question is, when building your team or your tribe, what roles should be filled and what are some important considerations when choosing people for these various roles?
Sure, we hit on several of them already, but the ones that come to mind are, obviously if any trust is involved, the trustee, that is a big one, and ultimately a trustee is going to play a huge role in the plan. So having either the right person, or we've kind of harped on it a bit here, on the right firm managing that trust as a trustee is very important. A guardian, if needed. Not every person with a disability needs a guardian. In fact, the large majority of people with disabilities do not need a guardian. It's where they're more extreme cases where perhaps somebody would not be able to take care of themselves or take care of their finances, where that would be needed. So having a person, at last resort, an organization, but typically a person who can serve in that role later, or now if needed, right now. And then, as far as just having kind of there are informal roles that you can have around the person. One that comes to mind is just a loved one who's an advocate, who's keeping an eye on everything that's going on. Could be an aunt or an uncle or a friend or other family member, making sure that the person's living independently, just checking in on them, see how they're doing. How's everything going? Are they living in conditions that you would want them to be living in? These are things that an advocate can always do, and there's nowhere you need to sign on the dotted line to be that serve in that role for a person. And then there are other niche ones like trust protector. That's somebody who's in many trust documents, who's not necessarily a trustee calling the shots all the time, but it's somebody who's overseeing the trust, making sure that the trustee is still the right trustee for the trust, and that the rules of the trust are being followed, and if there's any disputes that they can get involved and make sure that try to resolve those as much as possible. Those are some of the big ones. Of course, power of attorney documents, healthcare power of attorney documents in lieu of for example, in lieu of a guardianship can be a good alternative. Perhaps somebody doesn't need a full guardianship, but they need a power of attorney document so that you can make medical decisions for them, or someone can make medical decisions for them if they can't do it themselves. So that's quite a bit. I know we're running up against the hour here. That's just the start. So think about who's important to you and who's important to your loved one when you name these people.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Cory. Thank you, Kevne. So I just want to make sure that this disclosures gets shown, and you can learn even more on this topic by tuning into our weekly podcast, Your Life Simplified. This Thursday, June 22nd, Kevne will be the guest talking about this topic. Also, today's recording is available for replay. If you want to share it with yours, or if you want to share it with somebody in your circle, you can find that on the Mariner Wealth Advisors YouTube channel, on our website. Also, you will be sent a link to the webinar for anybody who registered and watched this live. So I just wanted to thank our guests again. What an amazing webinar, and we just wish you the best.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.